everybody. Don't you want a president who will make America healthy again? Don't you want a president who's going to protect our freedom? During COVID, we saw the greatest attack on America's liberties and our constitutional right, and at any time in American history. We saw by February of 2020, they were already censoring doctors, scientists, individuals, anybody who questioned the government orthodoxy. The American press, guardians of the free speech, of the First Amendment, of our democracy, all took part in this unprecedented effort to silence dissent in our country. The press, which is supposed to function to speak truth to power, instead began silencing the powerless and acting as a bullhorn for government orthodoxies. And as soon as they figured out that they could censor us and that we were going to put up with it, they began an assault against all of our other Bill of Rights. Hamilton, Adams, and Madison said that we put freedom of expression in the First Amendment because all of the other rights are dependent on it. A government that has the capacity to silence its critics has license for any atrocity. So the First Amendment was the most important right. And now, as soon as they figured out that we were going to put up with them silencing dissent, they began their attack against all of our other Bill of Rights. There's three legs in the First Amendment. The first is freedom of speech. The second is freedom of worship. They closed every church in this country for a year. With no scientific citation, no public hearing, no notice and comment rulemaking, no environmental impact statement, all of the protections and the safeguards of democracy that I've been litigating for 40 years against companies and governments when they try to skirt those requirements. Suddenly they all just disappeared. And one bureaucrat who'd been there for 50 years, you know who I'm talking about? He just said, close the churches. And that was it. And then they went after the third leg of the First Amendment, which is freedom of assembly. They told us, again, with no scientific citation, we have to social distance from each other. We can't assemble. We can't petition and protest in groups. And nobody had ever done that before. Again, there was no hearing, none of the safeguards of democracy. Then they went after Fifth Amendment property rights. They closed 3.3 million businesses in this country with no due process and no just compensation. And the businesses that were left, they closed all the churches, but they left the liquor stores open. They closed the little businesses, but they left Walmart open, and Facebook and Amazon and all the big tech companies that were profiting from the pandemic and from all these closures. They then went after the Fourth Amendment prohibitions against unwarranted searches and seizures. With all this track and trace requirements that we had to leave our homes, to go into a building, to transport ourselves to any other jurisdiction, to take an airplane. We had to show our private medical records. They waived HIPAA. They made us disclose our private medical records to virtually anybody who asked. They turned us into a tyranny. They told us to strap on masks again, with no science behind it. And that only the worst tyrannies in the world, people like the Taliban, like the Iranian government, the Saudi government, these are the ones that force their citizens to wear masks because it dehumanizes them. It turns them from spiritual, creative, independent human beings into a faceless mask of compliance and obedience. And then they went after the Seventh Amendment, which guarantees jury trials to Americans. And here's what the Seventh Amendment says: no American shall be denied the right of a trial before a jury of his peers in cases or controversies exceeding $25. That's all it says. There is no pandemic exception. And the framers of the Constitution knew all about epidemics. There were two epidemics during the Revolutionary War: a malaria epidemic that decimated the armies of Virginia, a smallpox epidemic that decimated the armies of New England. Between the end of the Revolution and the signing of the Bill of Rights in 1792, there were epidemics in every city in our country: cholera, yellow fever, typhus, typhoid, malaria, that killed tens of thousands of Americans. Everybody knew about this, and yet they did not put an epidemic exception in the United States Constitution. They wrote the Constitution for hard times, not for easy times. They wrote the First Amendment not to protect the kind of speech that everybody wants to hear that doesn't offend anybody. They wrote it to protect the kind of speech that offends people and we don't want to hear. They wrote it to protect misinformation and disinformation and lies. And Louis Brandeis said that the remedy for bad speech is not censorship. It's never censorship. It's more speech. In America, our whole system of government, which is rooted in the First Amendment, is based on this confidence. And when ideas are allowed to triumph in the marketplace of debate, and we will have a better country, we will have more freedom, and we will have a better government in the long run. And this week, Hillary Clinton, Tim Walz, and Kamala Harris all said the same thing. They said that if the Democrats get back into office, that they are going to make sure that misinformation and disinformation is censored. They said that the First Amendment, or they were specifically talking about Elon Musk, and they said that they were going to teach him that the First Amendment is a privilege, not a right. Do you consider the First Amendment to be a privilege?
No!
Do you consider it to be your right?
Yes!
Your God-given right?
Yes!
Do you want to elect government officials who are going to take that right away from you?
No!
So, and by the way, who was the biggest perpetrator? We now know, and everybody admits, who was the biggest perpetrator of misinformation during the pandemic?
Fauci!
Did you say Anthony Fauci?
Yeah!
No, it was the government of the United States. So we don't want the government We don't want to give the government power to censor other people's misinformation while it perpetrates its own, do we?
No.
And you look at that pandemic, you look at the management and the disaster. The Brown University, they closed all the schools. The Brown University study said our children, our toddlers in this country lost 22 IQ points. A third of children are now going to be taking remedial education, and many believe they will never recover. The GMAT scores are down. All of the scoring of IQ and our children's intelligence are down. This did a terrible, terrible blow to our country. And what was the point of it all? Well, we look at what the outcome was. And the outcome was that they shifted. They closed all of the small business in this country. 41% of black-owned businesses will never reopen. They shifted money upward. They strengthened these big tech institutions like Amazon and Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and Google. And they weakened Main Street and small business and the American worker, and they shifted $4.3 trillion from the American middle class to this new oligarchy of billionaires, which is the biggest outcome, the biggest shift in world history of wealth. And they shifted power. We gave our government all these new powers. And I want you all to remember three things, three rules. One is that when you give a government a power, it will never voluntarily relinquish it. Second rule, that if you give a government a power, it will ultimately abuse that power to the maximum extent possible. And the third rule is that nobody ever complied their way out of totalitarianism. So what are we going to do if they ever try to do this again? We're going to resist, resist, resist. What are we going to do if they try it again? Resist, resist, resist. What are we going to do? Resist, resist, resist. And we enriched all of these corporations and their captive agencies, and now want to go and commoditize all of the things we value in our lives. They're commoditized the Constitution. They have turned the courts into servants for authority instead of the servants of the people. They've commoditized the press and turned the press away from the First Amendment and into propagandists. They're commoditizing our landscapes. They're commoditizing our health. And they're commoditizing our children. And the biggest beneficiary of the pandemic was, of course, the pharmaceutical cartel. And if you're a part of Big Pharma, the most valuable asset in this country today is a sick child. And so they want to keep you, they don't want to kill our children. They just want to keep them sick and dependent on chronic disease drugs for the rest of our lives.
That's right.
And they now have so much power over this, the exemplary democracy of the world, that they have been able to make us the sickest country in the world. We have the sickest children in the world. When my uncle was president, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, that number is around 60%. When my uncle was president, I was a 10-year-old boy. We had 3.4% of Americans were obese. Today, 74% of Americans are obese or overweight. Japan, 3% of the people are obese, the same as we were in 1960. We have explosions Autism has gone from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in every 34. 1 in 10,000 in my generation, 1 in every 34 in my kids' generation. Juvenile diabetes, which when I was a kid, the average pediatrician saw 1 case over a 50-year career. Today, 1 out of every 3 children who walks through his office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic. Our fertility levels are plummeting. Teens today have 50% testosterone and 50% of the sperm count as they did 2 generations ago. American girls are hitting puberty at 8 years old. The average is between 10 and 13, which is 6 years younger than it was 2 generations ago. We have the lowest puberty rates among girls in the whole world in this country. We have lost, since 1970, when we were leading the world in longevity, we've lost 6 years compared to Europe. In Japan, in Italy, we spend 4 times per capita what Italians pay for health care, and we live 7.4 years less. So we are commoditizing ourselves. We're destroying our country, including our national security. 77% of our children can no longer qualify for military service, and it's costing us $4.3 trillion a year. It is an existential threat to our country. Our country is strong and it's resilient. It's not going to be destroyed because we get the social safety net wrong or because we miscalculate about our healthcare system. It's going to happen because chronic disease is going to destroy us, and it's going to destroy us soon. If we don't win this election for a president who's going to make America healthy again, who will bring me into Washington, D.C. to reclaim our agencies from the pharmaceutical companies and from the big ag companies and the big food companies that are trying to destroy them. And you know that our food system got transformed in the early 90s. The tobacco companies were loaded with money, but they were under attack from lawsuits and from scientific revelations and government hostility that was eroding their consumer base. So they began using their excess cash to buy all the food companies in our country. By the end of the 1990s, the 2 biggest food companies in the world were Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds. They took all of their scientists that they were using to make tobacco more addictive, and they brought them over to the food industry to find ways to make food addictive. And they invented all these new chemicals in laboratories that were not the product of nature. And they put it in our food, and our bodies do not have the capacity to process those materials. They wouldn't let them do this in Europe. We have 1,000 ingredients in our foods because of the capture of these agencies that are illegal in Europe. So they're making the kids sick, and they're making money on it by addicting them to poisonous food. Now, I'm not even going to say food-like substances. And then their partners in the pharmaceutical industry are cleaning up the profits on it. And FDA now gets 50% of its budget from pharmaceutical companies and from big food companies. And we know who runs FDA. Do you think that FDA cares about your health? No. Do you think CDC cares about your health? No. Do you think HHS cares about your health? No. Do you think that NIH cares about your health? No. Do you think the United States Department of Agriculture cares about your health? Do you think USDA cares about small farmers? No. There's one thing they care about: money. And we need a president who's going to come into office in this country and who is going to dismantle this corrupt merger of state and corporate power. Think that you deserve a president of the United States that is going to protect our children? And don't you think that the United States deserves a president that's going to protect our freedoms, our constitutional rights, our freedom of speech, our freedom of worship, our freedom to assemble, our right to jury trials, our right to be free from unwarranted searches and seizures? And don't you want a president who's going to make America healthy again, and who's going to make America free again, and is going to make America once again the greatest nation and the moral authority around the globe? And you need to go to the polls and get your friends there and get Donald Trump and me into Washington, D.C.
Fellow Americans, our nation, our republic is at a crossroads.
And our system is broken.
We are no longer a government by the people and for the people.
We're something else now.
In today's age, we fear the government. We feel gaslit. We feel controlled.
Our free speech has been censored.
Our faith is attacked.
And lies are spread far and wide.
This is why Republic was created, to restore the tools that have been lost.
To inform, organize, and act. But it's all up to you.
Not others.
You.
Only you.
It's time to take back our republic, one town at a time.
As a nation, we don't always agree on everything, but we do agree on one thing. Our freedom.
Freedom.
Freedom. Freedom. Freedom. Every American who cares about the truth needs to join Republic.
This is our moment. This is our stand. This is how we build,
rekindle,
and restore our republic.
I want to give an additional thank you to our sponsors, Maha, Republic, the advocates, everyone else who's donated. Thank you so much. Matt Toon came out earlier and he told you we're still fundraising to cover the cost of this amazing, beautiful, free event. We've raised $50,000 today thanks to